Hello, everyone. I am Nasser Ashadi from University of Missouri in St. Louis. The topic of this panel discussion revolves around how and why we should incorporate patent and commercialization into tenure promotion review process. As you know, it has been almost 2 decades since a major university announced its intention to do exactly that. But at the time, most of us thought that other universities would follow the suit. But standing here today, we all know that we face quite a bit of a challenge in getting patent and commercialization into a review process through tenure committees and administrators, etc. Our panel discussion today includes 4 university leaders who will share their thoughts on the topic. Each of them will have 5 minutes for opening statement, followed by a series of questions that I have prepared for them. And we will have time at the end for questions from the floor. As Paul mentioned, we intend to produce a white paper from proceedings of the discussion today that will be available to the membership. Our first speaker is Maury Gharib, who is Vice Provost for Research, and Hans W. Lippmann, Professor of Aeronautics and Bioinspired Engineering at California Institute of Technology. He co-founded Bioengineering Option at Caltech. He holds more than 50 U.S. patents in the areas of biomedical devices and imaging technology. He's a fellow at AAAS and 5 other professional societies. He has received 5 new technology recognition awards from NASA in the fields of advanced laser imaging and nanotechnology. He received the R&D 100 award for the design of a 3D imaging system in 2008. He is an NAI Charter Fellow. Maury?
Good morning, and thank you for inviting us, Paul. This is a fantastic venue for really understanding issues that inventors and entrepreneurs face in this modern economy. I would like to spend my 4 minutes basically to address Lee and also some of Eric's comments. You said for 20 years at Caltech and many other universities, there has been this attitude towards basically avoiding inventorship and to be inventors and giving credit to our inventors in academia, and also not helping them to do the technology transfer properly. As you know, Lee, things have changed at Caltech also. Since 1995, we have done a thorough soul-searching of how do we deal with these problems, how to encourage inventorship, creativity, because not because everybody else is doing it, but because it's important to the future of modern universities. How do we address and how to translate this to the question of tenure? It's very important because there is a model, we call it Pasteurs Quadrant. We have Niels Bohr type scientists at Caltech, we have Louis Pasteur types, and we have Edisons. But these are not different people. There's the same person, same faculty that switches back and forth between Niels Bohr and Edison. And we have so many examples like that. Bob Grubbs, he won the Nobel Chemistry Prize in 2008. But before winning that prize, when he came up with the idea of metallized polymers, he filed it, he patented it, he started a startup, very successful one. And he won the Nobel Prize for having actually a mathematical model for predicting that process, which is very basic science. So Caltech has started to appreciate this generation of scientists, especially the new young ones that have this attitude that they don't need to be just Edison, they don't need to be just Niels Bohr, they can be Louis Pasteur. They can switch back and forth, and we give them credit. We don't separate it, that because you invented this, you get the credit, the tenure, or you did the theoretical work. Just this amalgam of being multifaceted is being credited without even being so obvious to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Marie. We're going to go through all the speakers first before Q&A. Our second speaker is Patrick Harker, President of University of Delaware and research leader in operations management and economics, financial services, operations research, and transportation systems. He holds a U.S. patent and U.S. copyright for methods optimizing transportation schedules. He has published or edited 9 books and 100-plus articles and is an ISI highly cited researcher in mathematics. Harker is a member of IEEE, the American Economic Association, and International Academy of Management. He's an NAI Charter Fellow.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for having me. And particularly, it's great to see Eric Kaler. Just so you know, Eric was on the search committee that brought me to the University of Delaware. Then he left right away. So he got out of town when the get was good, Eric. I want to just make a couple of comments about the University of Delaware, our approach to how we're thinking about this, and then raise the issue about tenure. First, University of Delaware, if you think about the university, it's a university designed by the DuPont company and the DuPont family. If you go back in its history, before World War II, before the GI Bill kicked in, over 50% of the students were engineers, and they almost all went to work for the DuPont company. If you roll forward today, when I got there in 2007, the university really was not focused, except in certain pockets like Eric's old department, chemical engineering, on issues related to economic innovation and development. That's changed. The first thing we did is we created an office. I know the question came up earlier. Companies are very confused about universities. Where do they go? So we created an office of economic innovation and partnership, underneath of which sits the tech transfer office, but it's broader than that. It's about building deep, lasting partnerships with companies. I'll give you one example. So Delaware is the home of the credit card industry and the back office of all the major banks. JP Chase is one of the major companies in the state. And give you a sense of scale, JP Chase's annual IT budget is $9 billion a year. So they are a tech company that issues money as opposed to other things. It's just bits, right? It comes in the form of money versus other forms of information. They are dying for technical talent and new ideas. So they actually have space. To give you a sense of what we've done, they now have space in one of our buildings, one of our business school buildings, where our students, they swipe in after class, they become a JP Chase intern for 8 months, working on global enterprise technology, very large-scale systems, cybersecurity issues. We continue to develop that kind of activity. We acquired, in fact, it fell in our laps right across the street from us, 272 acres, which was the old Chrysler Newark assembly plant that we're converting into a major science and technology park. The litmus test for who shows up on that is they have to be open to faculty research and or student internships. And we've done a whole bunch of other things. And one of my favorite is a spin-in program. You hear a lot about spin-out. I love this idea of spin-in. It wasn't my idea. It was somebody down in the entrepreneurship program. Entrepreneurs come in, they pitch an idea to the students. Students sign up to work on that entrepreneur's project, and they become part of it. And this has actually led to several companies being launched out of the university and our students getting jobs with these startups. It's a great idea. It's not just about spinning out the technology. It's about entrepreneurs looking for talent, young talent, to bring in. That then gets to the issue about tenure. We, like every university, are really struggling with this, and how do we start to move this ball forward? But first, I think it's important to recognize, back to the question, would Edison get tenure? The bigger question is, would he want it to begin with, right? That means you have committee assignments, you got faculty senate. I mean, we have to recognize that where universities are going today, it's not just about the tenured faculty, but about clinician educators, research faculty, and others, and recognize their unique roles they play and important roles they play. And it's not all about tenure or nothing. And I think we just need to break that model. because not everybody wants it and not everybody should have it. We need different models for different types of faculty. That said, let me go back to the early days of why do we even have tenure? And I think that's the first question to ask. So in my previous life, before I went to Delaware, I was dean of the Wharton School and on the faculty there for 24 years. Tenure began because of Scott Nearing in the turn of the 20th century, who spoke out against child labor as a labor economist at the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania. And the trustees of the University of Pennsylvania, some of whom had child labor, they fired him. That began the modern version of tenure. And why I bring that up is tenure's about letting faculty speak the truth and do what they believe is fundamentally important and have that academic freedom. By the way, that does not mean that faculty get to speak anything on their mind, even if they have no expertise in a field. Tenure should not make that possible. Faculty have to be an expert in the field. They can't just pontificate on anything and everything. We should hold them accountable. But there's a quid pro quo to that. In return, faculty have to do important stuff, right? I mean, that's the deal. That's the societal deal. We get tenure. We get this freedom. We should really focus on important stuff. And why I bring that up, an example of Scott Nearing, is I think we need to start focusing more on impact. Why? And I'm not there yet at Delaware, but what we need to focus on is impact. This is hard. I mean, Roland Coase won the Nobel Prize in Economics and published 12 papers in his career, and there's a whole branch of economics called Coasean economics. I had a battle with my old provost when I was at Penn, convincing Bob Barchi, who's now president of Rutgers, that economists publish at most one paper a year, and it's okay. And there's no first author, last author. They really focus on impact. Roland Coase, again, won the Nobel Prize with 12 papers. And the reason I raise this issue is when we think about, the only thing I want to add is when we think about tenure and the way this session was set up, we're thinking about the university and university processes. I really encourage us to think about the guilds we all belong to, because the universities are reacting to the guilds. They're reacting to the letters that are coming from the chemical engineers, the physicists, and so forth. And so it's not just about the process that the university has for awarding tenure. It's about the letter writers and the communities that we're all part of, recognizing that we should really focus on impact and not on even labeling A journals, B journals, counting citations, this and that. By the way, the National Academies all do this. It's embedded in our system deeply. Impact is not, other than impact measures of the journals and so forth. That's not what I'm talking about. It's, do your ideas, are you working on important things, and do they make a difference? And I think for the people that really want to make a difference, the line between the publication and the getting the idea out into the world to make a difference is very blurry. And frankly, that's the kind of faculty I want. And I think it can't just be, as we think about this white paper, don't just focus on university processes. We need to focus on the professional societies we're all part of. And they need to start asking the same question. What really matters? And this is a deep question because we have a proliferation of journals, as we all know. We're publishing lots of not so very good things, to be honest. The libraries are full of this. Impact is the key, and that's what we're really trying to focus on and moving the university toward that.
Thank you, Patrick. Our next speaker is Eric Kaler, formerly of University of Delaware, but he's actually currently president of University of Minnesota since 2011. Prior to that, he served as provost at Stony Brook University. After receiving a bachelor's degree in chemical engineering from Caltech, he earned his PhD from University of Minnesota in 1982. He's an expert in the field of complex fluids and has received numerous professional honors, including election to the National Academy of Engineering 2010. He's an NAI Charter Fellow.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I turned this question a little bit sideways and thought about two things. One is, would the University of Minnesota be a place that Edison would want to be? And what could we do to provide that framework for his success? I did reach the same conclusion that my friend Pat did as I thought a little bit about this. It's not 100% clear to me that Edison would want tenure in a modern research university. I think he'd be just perfectly fine in his own institute of system something. I think he would be much happier there. But were he to come to the University of Minnesota, I think he'd find an environment that's welcoming. We have a long history of inventions, ranging from the first open heart surgery to the Green Revolution by our alumnus Norman Borlaug, the invention of the black box for airplanes, and the retractable seatbelt. I bet you were wondering where that came from. And at least 12 different varieties of apples, including the Honeycrisp apple, which was identified as the Minnesota state fruit in a rare bipartisan vote recently. Our tech transfer and business creation opportunities are gotten to be fairly good over the past decade. 10 years ago they weren't, and I still carry the burden of that history. We were slow, we were unresponsive, we were risk averse, we were a classic academic institution in how we interfaced with entrepreneurs and with the opportunity, or then perceived perhaps as the threat of royalty revenues. And oh my goodness, how could we possibly manage the conflict of interest that comes from such things? But we're better. We have hired staff with industry experience. We've created a robust tech transfer operation. Our undergraduates do create intellectual property that's generated IP and business ideas. We've introduced what we call a stage gate process in our Office of Technology Commercialization, which walks faculty members through the various steps and identifies fairly early on the strength that the faculty member has laid up against the enormous weaknesses that most faculty members have in terms of recognizing that it's not just about the science, it's about marketing, it's about finding the niche, it's about manufacturing, it's about finding the right structure. And we have people who help that. Probably the single thing that is most helpful is an innovation we created about 15 months ago called the Minnesota Innovation Partnership, or MINIP, which is exactly what it is. I suspect many faculty members in the audience have had the experience I had at a former institution. It's better now, in which you would arrive with an idea that you'd cooked up with one of your colleagues at a meeting, and he was at a company and they had some research that was appropriate for the academic environment, and you wanted to work on it together. And you'd lay out a budget and an idea, and he'd get approved, and you'd go in, and oh my goodness, then the lawyers would come. And we would protect very carefully the idea that we do this research and something might come out of it that might be patentable, and that patent might issue, and that invention might make its way into a product that might go for sale, that might make money, and oh my goodness, we must protect our royalty stream. And we would go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and ultimately we would wind up owning 100% of nothing, because the engagement would simply break down over disagreement over a hypothetical royalty stream with net present value of small. And so MINIP simply eliminates that. If a company comes to us and the faculty member agrees for a 10% upfront royalty, think of it as a prepaid royalty, or $15,000, whichever is more, the company owns the intellectual property that comes out of that invention. There's a home run clause. If it's a $20 million a year annual sales, we'll get a piece of royalty at the end of that. But we looked back historically at the royalty stream that came to the university from those kind of collaborative inventions with industry, and it was very small. And in fact, clearly was exceeded in value by the amount of money we spent negotiating contracts to protect it. So we don't do that. We've signed 40 of these MINIP agreements with 35 different companies, and it's incredibly popular amongst our faculty. And it leads to a much deeper relationship. It creates an environment where you have internships, faculty exchanges, industrial researchers in our laboratory, and a deep engagement that leads ultimately to philanthropy and partnership that's very significant. So we're pretty excited about that. So finally, the question of what would Edison think? I think we provide him a pretty good entrepreneurial framework. If he did decide to want tenure, we have included technology transfer into guidelines for gaining tenure. And I was pleased to see in the College of Liberal Arts, actually, that you can have a tenured position because of possession of unique cultural experience or professional expertise. So it turns out that if he wanted tenure in art, music, theater, dance, writing studies, English, or ethnic studies, he'd be all set. The College of Science Engineering is not quite so liberal. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Richard Marquez. Richard is Vice President for Research and Economic Development at the University of Alabama-Birmingham. His research and patents center on controlling cellular calcium entry pathways in physiology and pathologies. He chairs the Board of Innovation Depot, Birmingham's award-winning technology startup incubator. He served as the president of Federation of American Societies for Experimental Biology. Richard is also an NAI Chartered Fellow.
Good. Thank you. I wanted to touch on 3 points having to do with the Edison opportunity that we're talking about. One has to do with some of the initiatives that we've taken that I think have brought this idea that innovation is going to be valued at our university and part of the evaluation processes we're talking about. We also have made a very key hire in the last months. We have Dean Sicking, who's an NIE inductee, who's sitting right in the middle of the room, who not only is going to have some groundbreaking research to follow on what he's already done, but also has an appointment in the Vice President's office as a Vice President for Product Development, which we think is a great step. And then just as an example, we do have someone with domain expertise who doesn't have a PhD that I want to highlight, just showing that we do need to be more flexible with where we look for our expertise. So first, with respect to the Institute for Innovation and Entrepreneurship, this incorporates many of the ideas that we've already talked about. We are enhancing the tech transfer process. We're actively encouraging potential collisions. We are going out into the field, bringing together neurosurgeons with our biomedical engineers and our business folks, and trying to solicit the kinds of collisions that would lead to intellectual property. So we're being much more aggressive and less passive in the way we handle intellectual property. We are involving our students, as has been mentioned, and we've decided that we as a university are going to internally invest in some of these ideas to a much larger extent than we ever had, with the idea that there would be a larger equity stake once, in fact, the licensure or the company is set up. And lastly, this institute also is providing a front door where we are inviting businesses to come in to share their problems with us and to allow them to really begin to influence how it is that we're thinking about things relevant to them. So let me talk just a little bit about Dean. Dean comes from a background that has to do with auto safety. And I'm going to show you a couple of clips here. Dean revolutionized the way that safety barriers are positioned both on racetracks for Indy and NASCAR as well as on many of our interstates. So this is what happened in the old days. This is the South, so you got to get used to some car racing here. And this is what's happened after Dean. This is 140 miles an hour. And since these barriers have been put in, there's been nothing more than a minor concussion that's occurred in NASCAR in the last 11 years. It's really a remarkable advance, and it's also an important part of how our interstate and our other highways are being protected now. So he came to Alabama. Alabama, as some of you may know, has a pretty good football tradition. We figured the only way UAB would be able to be the champion of our state would be to have our laboratory guys be doing it, not necessarily our football players. That was a crowded field. So Dean has turned his attention, as you can see in the bottom right-hand corner there. This has caught a lot of attention. Dean has turned his attention to the idea that we can design a better football helmet with many of the same kinds of concepts that were used in these barriers. And if you really think about football injuries, I'm going to show you, look at the top. The kinds of hits that cause concussions are hits that cause rotational acceleration. And we already have some good ideas as to how we can prevent rotational acceleration from the outside of the helmet being transmitted into what happens within the brain. We think that's a really important area, but it really does show how we're trying to get to this idea of looking at real-world problems and product development. The other clip that I want to show you here has to do with a faculty member that doesn't have a PhD, but is remarkably talented and is addressing some of the same problems that the financial institutions that we just heard about are dealing with. And that is this whole idea of cybersecurity. We have great IP that's been developed at UAB, and the guy that has led this is a guy named Gary Warner. This is NBC Rock Center.
His name is Gary Warner, a professor at the University of Alabama at Birmingham, whose unique program combines computer forensics and justice. Warner discovered a dramatic spread of a malicious computer superbug called Zeus. The bug spies on users as they type, copies passwords, targeting online banking.
Within seconds, someone is on your computer doing that wire transfer.
Warner red flagged the FBI after he made a critical breakthrough.
These guys were new people. They were establishing a better technology and using it in a way we hadn't seen used before. Some organizers and some good coders in the Ukraine who said, we're going to change the way people steal money.
And as you might expect, this kind of publicity helped Gary and helped us form a company that's just been spun out.
Disruptive security technology. It really changes the entire paradigm. Today, businesses around the world are fighting symptoms of cyber criminals. And today what we can do is we can actually identify the source and the nature of those cyber criminal activities.
With T3, the idea is that we gather emails into what we call a spam data mine. That UAB created technology allows us to receive spam emails and very quickly identify when there's a new trend, an emerging threat.
We can get that information about emerging threats out to businesses so they can protect their businesses from cyber criminals.
That's the focus of today's top threat report. We can identify the malware before the antivirus industry knows it even exists.
So we have a disconnect here between the audio and the video, but the point is that we were able to utilize Gary's expertise in a way that allowed us to spin off a company that we actually are going to own a pretty good percentage of. So it has not only been very clear that betting on him, even though he didn't have a PhD, was a good thing for us to do as a faculty member, but also that it's going to be lucrative. We're pretty confident for the university. The number of contracts they've signed already is remarkable. With getting back to the Edison issue, with respect to Edison, we had to agree that he was not going to be on very many committees, but we have presented him with a certificate such that he is now a professor with tenure if he chooses to come back and join us. We'd be happy to have him.
Thank you, Richard. Timothy Sands is our next speaker. He's the provost and the Basil Turner Professor of Engineering at Purdue University. He has served as an acting president at Purdue, director of Brick Nanotechnology Center, a member of the faculty at UC Berkeley, and researcher at Belcor. Timothy has 16 U.S. patents, some of which have contributed to manufacturing processes for GAN LEDs. He has published more than 250 refereed papers. He's a fellow of IEEE and the Materials Research Society. Tim is also an NAI Charter Fellow.
Thank you. Purdue's had a long history of leadership in technology commercialization, yet we still struggle with how we value these activities and their impact, and we're not yet aligned to a common purpose that would optimize that value, precisely because we don't yet know how to measure that value. So this session we're having today is right at the heart of what we're dealing with on campus today. Let me say a little bit about Purdue's history in technology transfer. The Bayh-Dole Act began with a conversation in 1978 between then Senator Birch Bayh, and he was a Purdue alumnus, and Ralph Davis, who was then the director of the technology transfer operation at Purdue. Davis offered, quote, Purdue had several promising government-funded inventions taken away under existing federal patent policies and making the technologies widely available through non-exclusive licenses doomed technology development. And that's what started that Bayh-Dole Act. Now, fast forward 30 years, and in 2007, Purdue developed its most recent strategic plan, which is called New Synergies. And one of the 3 pillars was promoting discovery with delivery. So technology commercialization at Purdue through patents, licenses, and startups is widely appreciated on campus as a critical component of the dissemination of knowledge and falls under the umbrella of engagement and essentially an important part of being a land-grant university. So let me say, before I say what's not working at Purdue and what we're talking about, let me just say what has worked well at Purdue. We graduate more engineers, scientists, and technologists than any university in the country. We average about 7 to 10 startup companies per year, file hundreds of patent applications per year, and we have a very high rate of deal flow. We've got 1,200 students from all disciplines who've completed our certificate in entrepreneurship and innovation. We've got about 3,000 more in the pipeline. And we have one of the, as you heard recently or earlier today, we have one of the most liberal student IP policies in the country. Our Burton Morgan Center for Entrepreneurship is located in our interdisciplinary park, which is called Discovery Park, and it's not in our business school. And at Purdue, that's a huge advantage. The business school is part of it, but all the schools, all the colleges take part in the Entrepreneurship Center. OTC, matter of fact, we just moved our Office of Technology Commercialization over to Burton Morgan as its physical presence on campus. Discovery Park itself is a campus resource that's generated $750 million in investment over the past decade, and it's one of the primary engines for discovery with delivery on campus. We have 14 drugs in clinical trials. Research Park in West Lafayette is part of a 4-campus Purdue Technology Park system that's one of the largest in the country, and it provides a home for many companies that begin with Purdue IP. And we have several funds for stepping up faculty inventions, including a Trask Fund. We were early adopters or partners with Alfred Mann. That fell through after several years of strong support, but that work continues, and we still focus on that step up, opening up new domains in information technology, continuing with biomedical devices, looking at drug discovery as well. So that said, Purdue's technology transfer enterprise is nowhere near the well-oiled machine that it might seem to be from the outside. We have a good bit of chaos, and a certain level of chaos is good, especially in this area. But we just counted up 28 programs or centers dedicated to technology transfer, innovation, and entrepreneurship on campus. And you can bet that they don't know the others exist. We don't have many home runs. We have a rather weak stream of licensing revenue. And our faculty IP policies are not particularly progressive. They really discourage a lot of our inventors. With Mitch Daniels joining us last month, we've begun the process of developing and aligning around a common purpose. And this is not set in stone, but the discussions on campus have come to, I think, a relatively simple conclusion that we should be ensuring that Purdue is a place for faculty, students, and staff who want to see the impact of their discoveries on society. It sounds simple and straightforward, but if that's our focus, and we can focus on that goal and not on revenue and other factors, we think we'll be able to bring talent to Indiana that will transform our local economy, and with all the attendant benefits of a university that's surrounded by corn and soybeans. I'm pretty optimistic about where Purdue is right now, but we're really in a state of flux. Now, if I could just make a couple of quick comments about the state of promotion and tenure. It happens that we're also in the midst of a campus-wide discussion which will eventually overhaul our P&T policies and procedures. They were last updated in the 1970s, so it's about time. The issue of valuing technology commercialization and entrepreneurship is one of a handful of issues that are really at the forefront of the discussion. When I return to campus next week, we're having a campus-wide open forum, and one of the topics we'll be discussing is that one. So let me make some observations about Purdue and its P&T. Every college, and I'm sure that some of this will also be familiar to those in other institutions. Each college at Purdue has its own P&T document, and some specifically include patents and commercializations, others do not. The culture has been bottom-up, and it's dominated by local customs and the departmental committees. We call them primary committees at Purdue. Some do not value patents. Matter of fact, I had all the deans together a couple days ago, and we went through and talked about all these issues, so it was good timing. Some do value patents and licensing activity in startups, and some see those as distractions, although this stance is becoming increasingly rare. Most regard patents as important considerations. One primary committee values patents at 2 to 3 times a publication. I'm not sure how you come up with that equation, but I thought that was an interesting comment. But no primary committee on campus of the 70 or so we have would promote a faculty member on the basis of patents and commercialization alone. Uniformly, I hear from our deans, and we heard this from one of our other speakers, that the most successful faculty in technology commercialization are in fact the same ones that are outstanding at discovery and are well published, cited, and recognized by their scientific or technical communities. Certainly, all the talk and resources that we've dedicated to discovery with delivery over the past 6 years have had an impact on the degree to which patents and commercialization are valued in P&T, but the change is very, very slow. While we are talking about P&T, we're also talking about impact and how it's measured. We heard a little bit about that a moment ago. In the context of patents and commercialization, I think this will eventually take us to a point where invention disclosures will have little value, patent applications slightly more, but not much. Licensed patents will be highly valued, especially those that produce royalty income as a measure of utility. Not the dollar amount, but the fact that they're generating royalties is something that I think will be valued. Patent issued may have currency like a publication in the sense that they undergo external review of some sort. And I think patents that are not licensed, that do not generate royalties, will have relatively low value. Let me conclude a little bit on whether Edison would receive tenure at Purdue. It turns out he would receive tenure in the business school or our College of Technology if he took the time to document his work, his theories on collaboration and innovation and teamwork. But there's no way that he would receive tenure in science or engineering unless he built his innovations on a framework of his own scholarship of discovery or his team's scholarship of discovery.
Great. Thank you. So I'm going to start with a question actually to Tim, who's our last speaker. What are the major impediments in fully incorporating patent and commercialization activities in academic performance reviews? Now, I'm talking about fully incorporating all these activities, because a lot of universities now include sort of as an afterthought number of patents issued. How are you going to weigh them, as you mentioned? Do they count as like one more published paper or 3 published papers in top journals and so forth? I guess the last part of the question is, to what extent is cultural or generational? I'm trying to sort of address what Leroy Hood was saying earlier, is that, we are talking about these things, but what are you going to do about it? In back of my mind, I think some of this may be indeed generational. You're not going to convince certain senior faculty that happen to be sitting on these tenure promotion panels that generationally may be disconnected from what goes on in this field.
Well, thank you. My observations on that are exactly as you phrased it, that there is a generational aspect, and I don't think that changing that is going to happen. That's not going to change over any kind of short time period. Although we have seen, as we've emphasized discovery with delivery, some of our senior faculty who initially had very negative views and felt that this was a distraction are starting to see the light, but it's a slow process. I guess one thing I'd point out that, and it's not just for patents and commercialization, but also for teaching and other forms of engagement, that unlike our research enterprise, we don't have a lot of external validation for that. Faculty are motivated, I think, to a large extent by the fact that they receive accolades from the outside, that their stock, if you will, rises because of external validation, and we don't have that in those other areas. So one thing I would encourage, really encouraged by the discussion here and the National Academy of Inventors and its ability to hopefully in the long run recognize and provide maybe third-party validation of the impact of work in patents and commercialization. That will in turn eventually result in promotion and tenure committees, primary committees, paying attention. No matter what we write and insist that the colleges include in their P&T documents, even if everybody lists every little thing they do, it just won't carry the day until we have external validations or third-party validation and create that kind of a marketplace, if you will, for faculty.
And I think that point is, you made a very good point, and that is just having disclosure and even a patent doesn't mean that there's commercial value to it. And universities have a tendency of building these, the infrastructure for technology transfer offices. It becomes a sort of a self-perpetuating arrangement where, you know, the performance indices are often disclosures and patents. And then we have lots of licenses that generate very little or no income whatsoever. So, I mean, you can issue even a license, I mean, and if that's going to generate inflow of cash, and by that I don't mean just financial profit. What I mean is that if indeed a technology is relevant in the marketplace, it should generate cash flow. That's an efficient way of capturing the value. And that I think should be on the table as well. I'm going to throw the same question at Gharib here, that since your institution is on forefront of discovery and technology, etc., what are the challenges you see, and where do you think impediments lie when it comes to not fully incorporating technology transfer and tenure promotion decisions?
That's a very difficult question to answer because, as I mentioned before, not just in our institution, things are kind of very mixed. We don't count the number of papers either, or number of patents, but we count on the impact, as everybody else mentioned here. So the impact is high, whether it comes from basic research or innovation, patents. There are basically parameters that we count in the tenure. In the meantime, you know, it's compared to other institutions, Caltech receives about 130 issued patents every year, and MIT is about 150, but they're 4 times larger. So that shows that within Caltech and within our environment, the innovation and invention, having patents, is part of the texture of the university. And but we have not come up with an index that's okay. This is this much revenue coming from licensing, therefore you get your patents. It's more impact that licensing has. If new medical devices, it's a new cure, something that, you know, solves a societal problem. Those are parameters that we consider.
That's very good. Thank you. Next question, I'm going to ask the 2 presidents. Patrick, you first. What's the role of university leadership? And that includes the chancellors, presidents, board of trustees, deans, etc., in broadening the traditional performance criteria to include patent and commercialization activities. To what extent should the effort be facilitated from bottom up, where faculty entrepreneurs form their own advocacy groups?
Well, I think first and foremost, university presidents, trustees, and so forth need to clearly define and then live the mission of the university. And this is important, for example, go back to the issue of land grants. So we just celebrated the 150th anniversary of the Morrill Act. When we first started down this path at the University of Delaware, making changes, I have some reception. We have lots of them, right? One faculty member in history, after many adult beverages, came up to me and was giving me a hard time about this move, saying it's inconsistent with a land-grant university. Now, first I said, you're a history faculty member, right? He said, yes. Have you ever read the Morrill Act of 1862? It's completely consistent. But that's part of the issue. We have to continually live and redefine and restate the mission. Because what happens is, without that, the guilds, again, go off into their corners, define what they think is important to themselves, and not what's important to the larger university mission. So I think that's the most important thing that comes from the top. But then the bottom, the faculty have to take ownership of that. Without that, it's useless, right? Nothing happens. And so the faculty have to take hold, grasp it, and live it. And I'll give you an example. I mean, I have, like many universities, the most Byzantine tenure and promotion process with all the documents and so forth. Now, again, we're all creatures of our past. I come from a place at Wharton. We had 1 paragraph that defined tenure and promotion. 1 paragraph. I think it was, don't quote me, but 4 sentences long. That's it. And the only question we asked ourselves there was, is this the best person in the world, and do we need them right now? That's it. We didn't ask anything else. We didn't count papers. There was none of that. But what happens is when this system, when we create a Byzantine system, and that comes from the top and from the bottom. It comes from the bottom because it's a job protection program. Again, tenure is viewed as a job protection program, not as being elevated to being senior partner of the organization, right? And that's the way I see senior faculty. They're the senior partners. They are the owners of the institution. When you lose that sense of ownership and that we're going to do whatever it takes to make the university great, then you get into the bean counting. Counting patents, counting papers, counting this, because you don't have any sense of mission and you don't have any sense of ownership. So to me, that's the most critical thing a board of trustees and a university president and others can do, is keep focused on the big picture and keep focused on impact.
Right. And also, again, talking about bottom-up advocacy, one of the challenges I think most universities face is that there's still this idea of segmentation of responsibility. So some of the perhaps in institutions that have a culture of innovation, etc., it's not as much of a problem. Sometimes our faculty inventors think that I'm going to do my brilliant work, and it's your job to sell it for me. Mm-hmm. And how dare you not see the merit of what I do? So therefore, and that's part of the problem in tenure promotion cases, where some of our inventors, they lock themselves up in laboratories or someplace else in an incubation facility, etc. They simply don't show up in faculty meetings or Senate meetings, etc. And that's part of the challenge. So the idea of them actually coming to the table with some sort of organized advocacy role would be interesting to consider. I'm going to ask Eric also to comment on this question.
Sure, I'd agree with Patrick. The tone at the top is obviously important. I think celebrating successes when we have opportunities to talk about success at the university is important, and that builds elements of university culture, which is obviously important to nurture those kind of activities. I'd like to take just a minute, though, and maybe kick up my heels a little bit on this subject. There are patents and there are patents, and there are papers and there are papers. I put my kids through college as an expert witness in patent infringement cases. And when you look back at patents and the impact they've had on commercial success, and particularly when it gets to litigation, it's a messy, messy thing. You know, you look at a patent that's issued, and you try to put yourself as a person skilled in the art, and you think, oh my goodness, because it's not peer reviewed. It goes through a long process. The heavy hand of the lawyer in terms of claim construction and reading in or out prior art is an art. And the inventor has a role in that, but it's not the sole role. And when you line that up, it really is, in my view, and this, we can debate this over some adult beverages if you'd like to, there's a qualitative difference between a peer-reviewed scientific paper and many patents that I've written and that I've seen. And so I struggle sometimes with this equivalence. I see them actually as distinctly different, important in their own way, validated in their own way. But sometimes the validation cycle, the time scale for validation of the patent, can be quite long. And the issuing time can be long, the time to get a license. And so again, in a tenure committee, you're usually betting on the slope of the career instead of the integral. But I think there are other elements that need to go into considering the value and the impact that a patent has vis-a-vis a peer-reviewed paper.
Right. I guess what I'm hearing from the panelists is that it's not enough just to count these elements of performance and tech transfer, disclosures, licenses, or patents. We have to have a system in place where we actually look at individual patents and make a decision what the value of that patent is after all. You know, one easy way would be, again, it depends on a whole host of other issues, is that whether any of these patented technologies get commercialized within 5, 10, 15 years, because again, that sort of leads to marketplace and demand to determine whether it's worthwhile or not. I'm going to pose the next question to Richard. How would you incorporate commercialization into university mission in creating knowledge and training students to become productive citizens? Does the potential for revenue generation commercialization conflict with the rest of the mission? Again, this goes back to sort of a more traditional perspective of university being after absolute truth, and anything beyond that that will get into making money or commercial aspect of venture may be basically changing the culture. The question is, how do you pose that? How do you add commercialization and patenting to traditional areas of research, teaching, and service and still have it as a coherent mission?
Well, it has clearly changed over the years, and the idea that universities should have some percentage of their income stream, as someone mentioned earlier, coming from a technology transfer office is a very, very dangerous thing, I think. We all are going, especially our state institutions, we're going back to our state legislators and looking for support that's based not just on our ability to educate students, but on the fact that we are big economic drivers. UAB is the largest employer, single-site employer in the state of Alabama. And we look for monies outside the Education Trust Fund that we share with K through 12. We look for monies in the economic development funds as ways to allow us to recruit people like Dean to come to our university. So we're playing that card. We're saying we can be drivers both because of the people we hire within the institution as well as the people that are going to be hired by the companies that we spin off. So it's an important driver as we have these conversations with our state leaders in terms of securing funding for ourselves. I think that there is often a tendency to overpromise, and we have to be very difficult with, or very careful with that. It certainly could come back to bite us at some point. The faculty do remain, to some extent, a little bit hard to persuade, some of them at least, that this should be a mission of the university. But we're young. We were founded in 1969, and we've always had a very sort of entrepreneurial bent that has led us to get to be over $400 million in research. So it's not as entrenched in our university. It hasn't been as big a deal. And because our Education Trust Fund is so limited, we really have tried to push that as a driver for why it is the university is so important to the state.
Thank you. I'm going to address the next question to Tim. Suppose that we have incorporated patent and commercialization fully into tenure promotion review process. Let's see what pitfalls we may face. If getting a patent counts toward tenure promotion, there are incentive issues for individual faculty. They would like to be to receive patents on whatever they are disclosing, right? And most tech transfer offices cover the cost of the patent, so they do all the legwork and pay for the cost. So there are clearly incentive issues involved. And suppose that a faculty member comes up for tenure promotion and denied along the lines that, well, among many things, you haven't had enough patents or you haven't commercialized enough of this technology. They can turn around and say that my brilliant idea was not understood by the tech transfer officer and they didn't do their job well. And it becomes sort of a blame game of some sort. How do we think through that kind of problem?
Well, I'm very familiar with that problem. Matter of fact, this morning I got 2 emails from disgruntled faculty who were upset with our OTC, not because it's so important for promotion and tenure, but those individuals just feel like it's what drives them. But I think you do point to some real potential issues. One way we've tried to get around that, because we don't right now have our OTC resourced at a level that would allow every idea to be treated at the level that every inventor wishes they should be treated in terms of time and money, is to bring in third-party or external panels who evaluate the IP right. And try to screen it. And the good thing about that, it's a lot of effort, but it does build some partnerships. You make some connections because you're bringing people from maybe the VC community or industry into those discussions. but it does separate out or sort of insulate the OTC a little bit, or your tech transfer office, because there's independent opinions making judgment. Right. And so where that affects the operation at Purdue is really in the decision of whether to invest step-up funds to move an invention forward. But you raise great issues. I don't know when and if these things become embedded in not only the promotion and tenure document, but the culture. We're going to have to deal with that problem.
Right. Thank you. I'm going to now pose the last question to all the panelists, and then we will turn to you to make comments or ask questions. What do you think universities, where do you think universities' patent and commercialization activities will be in 10 years? Gharib?
Next 10 years?
In 10 years from now, you know, if you think about like where we were 10 years ago, a lot of universities, when you talked about patent and commercialization, they thought it was a strange idea, you're out of your mind, etc. We have made a progress. Obviously, it's not perfect. I assume that 10 years from now, things will look quite different.
My guess is that just from the trend, that you're going to be much more proactive in terms of nurturing ideas and trying to identify the ones that they have the perhaps most impact, and try to be more active in finding resources to make them happen. For example, we are seriously thinking about a large endowment just for innovation, that any student, faculty, postdoc that has, as you called it, crazy ideas, and he doesn't want to spend time to write a proposal to NSF, NIH, wait for 2 years. He wants to do it next month. We should have a machinery that, you know, help them to try these ideas and very quickly assess them, and not to wait 2 years or 4 years before we find them. Results. And
that will be through Tech Transfer Office, through some sort of scientific advisory board?
Actually, in Caltech, we are doing it through Tech Transfer Office. And of course, there's a committee of faculty that also include entrepreneurs, local entrepreneurs, some VCs, and they cannot, of course, invest in those because of the conflict of interest. But those are there to help us to identify those ideas. So we have started this one about 2 years ago, and within 2 years, we find some really interesting results coming out, because these ideas the faculty, you know, shelf it for 2 years whenever he or she finds a time to write a proposal. This one is 1 page. Right. We just put down the ideas, discuss it with us, and we provide seed funding for 2 years.
Very good. Thank you.
I think you'll see great acceleration. You just have to look now that junior faculty are making decisions about which institution to join based on that institution's intellectual property policies and opportunities for commercialization. You see the pace and the inventiveness of undergraduate and graduate students now who will be our mid-career faculty in 10 years. And you also see one of my favorite things to say, which is this is a field where you make progress one obituary at a time, too. You'll see that much of the entrenched opposition to doing this will retire and move to Florida. So I see it's going to be
very good point.
I'd like to add to your comments. You know, strangely, the past 2 years we have received application students for undergraduates and graduates. They're asking about our patent policy.
Yeah. Oh, interesting.
Just really amazing to them.
Very interesting. Thank you. That's a good observation.
One point I would make in terms of how this gets incorporated into the university culture, the Vice President for Research actually has a very strong ally in the Vice President for Development, because this idea of having philanthropic funds that get invested in early ideas for students, for faculty, that allow you to do proof of concept stuff, that allow you to make prototypes, that allow you to hold bigger equity positions once you form a company, that's an exceedingly easy thing to raise money for. And so your vice presidents for development are going to be right beside you as you sort of make these decisions to go forward.
Great. Thank you. Patrick?
So I actually think in 10 years, universities are going to back off a little bit, but actually allow more IP to flourish. And what do I mean by that? So just quickly, we went in 07, 08 with this new office I mentioned at the university, and we re-engineered our patent process, and in 1 year we saw a 60% increase in patent disclosures by our faculty. 60. Everybody was sitting with this stuff in their desk drawer, and they weren't, because it was so cumbersome. Problem is, most of it isn't very commercially viable. So we're now triaging it very quickly and only focusing on a few things that we think we can take to market. And if we can't take it to market, we give it back to the faculty and say, it's yours, good luck. I think first we're going to have to do more and more of that. But I actually think the more progressive universities will take this one step further. And it's a different spin on the development office. I think most universities are going to realize they're going to make a lot more money from grateful patients, that is, grateful inventors, students, faculty, and so forth, than they are on the licensing. And this is what goes back to Eric's point. We'll see more models like MINT, Mint, I love that name. Because above some threshold, yeah, I want a piece of a grand slam. But otherwise, I just want to give it to you, and hope, and and the evidence has shown. Most of us don't make any money on our IP portfolios. And so at some point, the rational person should wake up and say, then why are we doing what we're doing? And I think sooner or later, rationality will kick in. We'll get the upside of a blockbuster, but otherwise, we're going to be giving more of it away and only focusing on a few things that we think we can drive forward. And the rest we'll get on the back end with philanthropy.
Thank you. Thank you. Tim?
I agree completely with what you just heard. I think it's a very exciting time right now. We've got, if there is a tsunami, this is the one that I think is the one that's about to hit us that really matters. I don't think we're, at least at Purdue, and I think we've heard similar things, that I don't think anybody really has it figured out yet. But just looking at the pipeline with the undergraduates coming in, having already started companies, it's going to be exponential growth. It's exciting, but we're going to have to streamline everything in order to handle it.
Very good. Thank you. We have about 10 minutes for a few questions or comments from the floor. If you have a comment, please keep it very brief. Thank you. Go ahead.
couple of things. In terms of faculty research, I love the 100% down to 0% comment, because you can have an agreement between yourself and an organization, and you keep working and working, and the document gets fatter and fatter in terms of the agreement. And my attitude, if it's an inch thick, it doesn't mean a thing, except whatever side lawyers are stronger. Going to what Patrick said, I really agree with that. I think tenure really means a number of things. I had a young colleague, doesn't matter where, who I knew, and he was working really, really hard to get tenure. And he said he couldn't wait to get tenure so he could kick back. And I was stunned at that. I was like, why are you doing this for passion and you love it and you're going to move forward? He wanted that tenure. So and Torrey Pines, where I'm ahead of that, I went to Richard Lerner, and when I was at Scripps, I said, I'm going to leave and start this institute. And he laughed at me and said, well, okay, when it fails, come on back. So I think the whole idea of tenure has to be reevaluated, and is being reevaluated from what I see.
Thank you. Next, yes.
Well, since the beginning of this organization, I've been involved with the NAI. This has been one of the crux of the issues that NAI wanted to take up. And I'm glad that such a discussion has taken place today to begin with. In addition to being part of the NAI, I'm also a faculty who is in the APT committee, Promotion and Tenure Committee at the College of Medicine. So I have lived through both of those scenarios. And last year, when we went through 60 applications, there was not a single application the award of patents came up during the proceedings. Usually, traditionally, people are not thinking about the invention disclosures, patents, when one is going through this process. The faculty is going through that process. So the key issue is a publication equivalent to a patent, and we have heard about the impact here, and when does a patent really become impactful, and how the publications are considered. There can be publications just for one referee actually reviewed it, and it could be impact factor of 2 or less. So the issue is, if the universities are prioritizing research and innovation in terms of the entrepreneurship, when do they take into account to add to the process so that in addition to having teaching, research and scholarly activity and service, that this become a criteria that you can also add on, that if a faculty has contributed to inventions at the university, as well as some of these inventions have led to a licensing, should that also be considered or not? The usual argument you get from the faculty, the rest of the faculty, is that, well, this is already part of the research and scholarly activity, but usually it is not. So that's the crux of the issue, and it has to really, in my opinion, it has to really come down to the university to deciding how to do it well.
Thank you. Yes.
So I think this panel is really about changing faculty culture to encourage them to commercialize their research. I stepped in 3 years ago at Boston University to run the tech transfer office. This office has been around since 1976. Really has not been that successful. In 3 years, we've been able to really organize it better with fewer resources, and the result is a lot of private capital has started flowing into companies that we're spinning out. So we've been able to make it happen. My experience is that it's a law of small numbers. Even at places like MIT and Stanford, there's just a handful of faculty that actually create these commercialized inventions. And at MIT it's probably around 30. At BU it's around 3 or 4, which we're trying to bring up to 10. So I'm not sure that bringing this into the tenure process, it's boiling the ocean. I think it's finding them. And absolutely the junior faculty, it's funny how often I'm getting called into meeting new junior faculty who are being recruited, who already are thinking about this, and they want to know how the tech transfer office is going to help them. It's surprising, but it's starting to happen quite regularly now.
If I could comment on that, because I think the issue about tenure, I don't think you need 50% of the faculty doing this. The question comes down, I think, when you have a healthy tenure process, is a group of senior faculty sitting around saying, can we live without this person, yes or no? Is this person essential to our mission? And that means you may have a faculty member who's a horrible teacher, but who's a brilliant scholar and surrounds him or herself with other young, brilliant scholars. You'll give that person tenure. We do it all the time. It would be the same thing in this, but you have to see it as part of the mission. And the faculty then have to say, yeah, this person, we need them. We don't need a whole army of them, but we need this person because they're invaluable to us.
Thank you. Yes, go ahead. Near the door, yes.
I had a question about, at your universities, when you're forming startup companies with this new developed technology that's gone through your patent disclosure process, are you directly investing in the companies, or are you just licensing the technology out to these companies? And is there any effects of your not-for-profit status by investing in those companies? Some of you said equity, and I was just curious at how you're breaking that down. We're running into some legal problems at our university, and I was wondering how you were handling it.
That's sort of a question that I think tech transfer offices have various policies to deal with it, but I will get one of our... Eric, would you like to volunteer?
Sure. I'll take it, and it's probably the same answer for everybody. We do both. We'll do ownership, we'll do equity, we'll do licensing. You get in some interesting institutional conflicts of interest, actually, if you do both, and you then have the licensing agreement fall apart at a time when you own equity, and who knows what wins, so you can wind up in court. Short answer is we'll do both.
Thank you. Last question, right there. Yes.
MJ Swallow, University of Central Florida. I kind of wonder what problem we're trying to solve. I think we heard several times that our most productive scholars our most productive patent pursuers and commercialization people are also very productive scholars, and I think we know when they're having an impact. I look at Professor Wu here, who has one of the most cited authors in his field. He has tons of patents, and he has wonderful students sitting over there. And we haven't hardly even talked about the real role of faculty and graduating outstanding students will have much more impact than any of their patents will ever have, because the multiplication factor is so great. I did hear a little bit about changing the culture of faculty, and we all know the cliche, trying to direct faculty is like trying to herd cats. Well, herding cats is not hard. You just move the food around. And you know, we give half of the net income of the first $300,000 back to the faculty member. That's pretty good motivation, and they never get less than 30% of the net income of the faculty. So I don't know if we have a problem that we have to solve. I think we always want a faculty member as opposed to a research professor that just does research, as opposed to an instructor who just does instruction. We want a faculty member to be a partner in the university, a senior partner in the university that does teaching, research, and service. The first level of review is done at the departmental level, where peers know whether this person is contributing, whether they're having any impact or not. I'm not so sure the system is broken.
Let me just comment briefly, is that few among us are brilliant in all aspects of performance. They're great teachers and researchers. We always say that to be an effective teacher, you have to really do important research and service and economic development, etc. But others are not so brilliant. They are good in one or two dimensions. And if you talk to any search firm that hires university presidents and senior administrators, they will tell you the challenge of getting people who are great in all of that. So with that, our time is up. Please join me in thanking our distinguished panelists.